Hi, so today we're going to look at Andrew Bolt's article, This Self-Loathing Insults Australian Values. So I haven't done any pre-preparation. I'm just going to be analysing it as I read. Now, when we talk about Bolt, there's really a couple of tone words that tend to apply to him. And I'll tell you as we go through the article which one applies in this case. But definitely, he is very sarcastic a lot. Okay, so he often tends to mock his opposition. Another thing you can use to describe him is satirical. Okay, now the difference between sarcasm and satire is sarcasm is a snide humour that states the extreme opposite of what you believe. For example, going no when you mean yes. However, satire is any type of humour that mocks or makes fun of somebody else. It doesn't have to be sarcasm. So we talked about the word a second ago, snide. Snide is derogatory or mocking, devious and underhanded. That can also be bold as well. Bold can also be very scathing, okay, which is severely critical, okay? So definitely a lot of those tone words will apply to bold. I'll confirm at the end of the article which ones apply best in this scenario. Okay, so here we have the opening picture. Tunisian women hold a banner during a silent march in the memory of a 13-year-old girl who was burnt by her father in a case of honour killing in Tunis. Now, just to begin with, this is a good photo to kind of start with. Women are often, treated as the vulnerable members of the community, so seeing them affected is meant to create a sense of sympathy. You can see as well that a lot of them are hanging their heads quite low. They seem to be very disturbed by this, and the concept itself of burning a 13-year-old girl to death is quite shocking. So this opening picture really helps to position the readers to see honour killings quite negatively, to feel sympathy for this young girl and anger towards anyone who would do such a thing. Now down here, the Sydney Opera House is Australia's most iconic building, and on its stage in August was to be a taxpayer-funded talk, Honour Killings Are Morally Justified. Now, here, juxtaposing this image of, which explains what an honour killing may include, burning a 13-year-old girl to death, with the statement honour killings are morally justified, juxtaposing those two together is kind of it's creating a sense of shock, because the reader would be appalled at the notion that anyone could justify such an act. Now, here he starts to obviously invoke some patriotic values. Now remember, in his heading he's already signposted that this is going to be about an insult to Australian values. So by saying that the Sydney Opera House is iconic, we want to think of the word icon. Okay, so an icon is something that's generally representative or a symbol. So you would almost imagine that things that happen in an iconic building would need to be representative or symbolic of things that happen, or of Australian values, or things that represent what it means to be Australian. Therefore, having such an act on the stage of an iconic building is an insult to Australian values, and as Australians, we're meant to feel again very offended by that. The fact that he mentions taxpayer-funded talk, again, when we're talking about audience, we want to find clues that help us to identify the audience as specifically as possible. Here we can identify them as Australian taxpayers. And so the idea that they're paying for something that is offending them will make them very outraged. Be clear, the title is not a question, but a statement. Okay, so here he's trying to make it very clear to the readers that this isn't, say, a debate about honor killings being morally justified that's being held. It's a talk that's asserting that idea as its primary contention. So therefore, um, Australians might not pause and think, oh, maybe it's a discussion and they're debating this and saying that it's wrong. But really here he's clearing that up. So he's just making it very certain in the reader's mind that they know that the talk that was going to be held was pushing this forward as its contention. Okay. Again, he repeats things like heart of Australia, to go in with this notion of iconic, because what's in our heart? Our values. What's to do with, symbolism and icons? They represent our values, what we believe in. Okay, so here the use of listing, okay, really builds up the severity of what's happening: strangling, stoning, burning, beating, or shooting, and daughters and wives. Then we've got supposedly. Okay, so supposedly casts a sense of doubt as to whether these daughters and wives, these, innocent, supposedly innocent women, have actually really committed a crime at all or done anything wrong at all. Um, so creating that listing makes us feel very overwhelmed. There's so many horrific things, one after another, all in a list. Okay, so we've got a lot of inclusive language here. Our cultural elite, our civilization. So he really wants to make it feel like it's personal. So this is not just an offence to some Australians. This is us. This is an offence to all of us. Um, and this notion of weakening our resistance to barbarity. So no one likes the idea of being weakened or weak. So it's a bit of an insult. And in response to being accused of being weak, we will want to do things to make ourselves appear stronger, to strengthen our resolve. Okay, so down here we have one of Bolt's typical sarcastic statements. So he says there, pity those powerless murderers. Now, do you think he really wants us to pity the murderers? No. Therefore, we deem this as being sarcasm, saying the extreme opposite of what he believes. Um, so by using sarcasm, we read that idea, pity those powerless murderers, and as we read it, we think to ourselves, how weird and how wrong that sounds. So we're positioned to oppose that idea. Here it's mainly like there are things I could probably analyze, but pretty much he's just giving background. He does, though, selectively choose quotes from the source here, the blurb of the talk, so that he outlines and identifies to us the things that sound really really wrong. So he's kind of just highlighting the parts of the article and the talk that we want to oppose. Okay. And again, going into the speaker's background and identifying him as an Islamist extremist plays into the public's fear of terrorism and fear of and prejudice towards Islam in general. So readers who are against Islamic values or have a fear of terrorism, this will give them even further reason to oppose Badar's talk. Okay. So here, his attack moves from being the speaker himself to the organisation that he belongs to. Again, This is also the use of listing, and again taps into the reader's prejudices. The notion that you know they want laws against criticizing Islam and demands that Australians live under Sharia law. People find that notion very threatening. Okay, and also Bolt makes statements that tends to shift the emphasis away from Westerners having a war on terror to saying that the war seems waged by Islam. That shifts the guilt away from us. We're not starting a war here, we're defending ourselves, which is something that's easier to sit with than the notion that we are instigators of war. Saying here in a parenthetical clause that the organisation is banned in some countries, um, kind of gets people's curiosity up as to whether it's banned in Australia or not. And since this guy's a spokesperson for it, it probably isn't. And the audience, sorry, the readers might be starting to think, well, if it's banned in some countries, why isn't it banned in Australia? Now, with Bolt, he does write a lot of articles that criticizes foreigners, immigrants, Muslims, so many, foreigners. He does have a bit of prejudice. Now, here with the aside, so something in brackets we can refer to as an aside, it's kind of saying something on the side. Depressingly, not one critic is a prominent Muslim. So he's kind of suggesting, and I guess in a way attacking the Islamic community by showing that while many critics opposed Badar's speech, none of them were notable Muslims. So he's kind of, in a way, implying that Islamists and Muslims in general maybe agree with Badar's views. There's no evidence of that here, but he is implying that. And I feel that, in a way, that's Bolt trying to, again, play up that prejudice towards the Islamic community as a whole. Hmm. Now it's interesting here, actually, because this kind of evidence sort of undermines what Bolt is saying a little bit. You remember earlier on he said, the title is not a question but a statement. Now, he actually is quoting the Opera House down here, and Badar is saying that it wasn't necessarily saying that honour killings are morally justified. And this would essentially undermine him. Now, all he's done to deal with these quotes is to say afterwards, how curious. And this little statement has kind of a mini paragraph all of its own. So he hasn't really argued the point to justify that this talk was actually about, in favour of honour killings. The little statement, how curious, just gets us to doubt the legitimacy of the Opera House's defence. Um, Also, these things like although the organisers and Badar haven't said what, again, encourages a sense of doubt and cynicism from the reader, because we're meant to feel like the organisers are just trying to cover up or protect themselves. So we're meant to feel a bit dubious, even though Bolt hasn't actually given us any evidence that the talk was definitely in favour of honour killings. Okay. So here he is broadening his comments again. The point of this paragraph is that our cultural elite. Now, when he says cultural elite, he does it in a pejorative way. So if we define pejorative, it's expressing contempt or disapproval. Okay, so, but it's not necessarily a pejorative term, but the thing is, he does not like this group that he refers to as cultural elite. Okay, he doesn't like this group who attacks people who condemn Islamic extremists. He gives two examples. The first is about the vilification by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. The second is about his own experience. Now, the reason why he gives an example that isn't related to him, in addition to his own example, is to show how he's not just angry because he was affected by this phenomenon. He's being more balanced than that. But then again, his own example also helps him be persuasive because it's a personal testimony. He personally has experienced this vilification. So we feel like he has some credibility in understanding how those who speak out get attacked by these so-called cultural elite. Now, there's an interesting expression here, white-anted. Okay, so the Macquarie Dictionary says the verb to white ant means to subvert or undermine from within, because termites, white ants eat the inside of wooden foundations, making them crumble. So in a way, this is sort of a metaphorical term, and gives us that sort of imagery that this support for the savage is kind of making our society crumble from within, our rich, safe, and free society crumble within. And so this makes people scared as well, the idea that their society is falling apart. Okay. Okay. So then remember at the very beginning, he kind of set sort of a patriotic sort of vibe, and he's quoted a few people here that have said some rather negative things about Australia. So those who are quite patriotic will feel upset by prominent people saying bad things about our country. Especially people who have titles like Australian of the Year, or people who, are governors, upstanding members of the community, saying bad things about our constitution, about our history, about our Anzacs. We're meant to, patriotically, we're meant to support our soldiers. So he says down here, yes, we have such rotten values that we should be more open to imported ones. Again, this is sarcasm. Andrew Bolt doesn't think we have rotten values. He doesn't think we should be more open to imported ones. And he says, honour killings, anyone? That's a rhetorical question, okay? Because who's going to say, yes, let's do some honour killings? For a cultural elite with a death wish, it almost makes sense. Okay, so it's sarcasm again, but what he means in that last part is that these cultural elite, again used as a pejorative term, um, are kind of, he's suggesting that they're dead set on sort of destroying their own country. So why wouldn't they want something like honour killings or poor values like that? So again, remember with sarcasm, you read these statements that are just so wrong, and in sarcasm you state them as if you agree with them. And then people hear that or they read that and they go, "Oh, That's really wrong. I don't like the sound of that at all. We shouldn't be saying yes to that. Okay, so again, from the very beginning, I said that bold is generally sarcastic and scathing, and they are the two words I would definitely use for this piece. And when you keep your eye out for bold pieces in the future, remember those words because bold has a particular style. And yeah, that's it.